With the near one can do it die. Making ship a India Mabualushi than the Sapone. Making ship a India Bualushi than the Piapon lady. Sarvina led in a coupon Saviro. She seemed Java.
As the Sayadaw promised the other day, today he will talk on how practice of the Eightfold Path can be, how non-practice of the Eightfold Path will not lead to liberation from samsara, and how the proper treading of this spiritual Eightfold Noble Path will be able to help one escape from this samsara.
Putania Udoma Shibum Piotavare Udomaga Tikilita Nikamawane Towipagawo Era Lady Upamazo Council Piopia Vido, Queen the Queen, a David Yakoti, Piapi Pioma, Povido, Didi the Nanale was Shivare.
In the past Dhamma talk, the Sayadaw outlined the three types of cycles: the cycle of kilesas, the cycle of karma, and the cycle of its resultants. Sayadaw will deal with each of these cycles separately, so that a better understanding of this whole process can be obtained.
Eddie Domurega Kilida was Suraha Aweza Tana Upara Tidomyogo Kilida will look hard.
Kilesa, the cycle of kilesa refers to avidya, which is ignorance, tanha, which is craving, and upadana, which is clinging.
Eddie Wizardana Ubadan called it Kilida Otum Yurega Wizard Suragaro. This is a liver of Mandiago Madira, Babe. Then you have Jomian Sanyabe.
Of these three aspects of the cycle of kilesas, avidya or ignorance refers to the ignorance of the Four Noble Truths, or alternatively a knowledge of the Four Noble Truths which is incorrect.
This alivago Madaimati already did Lusuyama. This aliva Suragaro the Goa Jauna Washija die. Duga this a senior Mandaya. Duga the Muria this a senior page of Mandaya. Duga Nidora this a senior Mandaya net. Eddie Nya the Yao Joe a gemma body, Megadisa, Mandaya, Eddie Mandaya Livago Yavara.
By the Four Noble Truths, of course, we refer to the truth of dukkha Dhamma, the truth of suffering things. Secondly, to the truth of the cause of suffering. thirdly, to the truth of cessation of suffering, and fourthly, to the truth of the Eightfold Noble Path that will lead to this cessation of suffering. And ignorance of these Four Noble Truths, or a misconception of these Four Noble Truths, constitute avidya, or ignorance.
အဲ့ဒီသစ္စာ၄ပါးတွေကဒုက္ခသစ္စာဆိုတာအလွယ်ဆုံးပြောရလို့ရှိရင်တော့မိမိတို့တစ်ခုလုံးဟာဒုက္ခသစ္စာပဲဒါပဲ
By the truth of suffering things, we can understand it briefly in a nutshell. If we were to say that our body, our whole body, is suffering.
အဲ့ဒီတစ်ခုလုံးတွေကတဝါ6ပါးမှာဖြစ်ပြနေတဲ့ယုံနာတရားတွေပေါ့ဒီစိကမြင်တဲ့အခါမှာတိကျဖြစ်ပေါ်သွားတဲ့ယုံနာတရားတွေနားကကြားတဲ့အခါနှာခေါင်းအနံ့တဲ့အခါရှားစားသည့်တဲ့အခါကိုယ်ကထိတွေ့တဲ့အခါစိတ်ကူးစဉ်းစားကြံစည်တဲ့အခါမျက်တောင်လေးခတ်တာမျက်လုံးပြည့်တာဖွင့်တာအစပေါ့ဒီကိုယ်တည်းကဖြစ်ပြတဲ့မြတ်အကြောင်းတိုက်ဆိုင်လို့ဖြစ်ပြတဲ့မြတ်ယုံနာတရားတွေဟာအဲ့ဒါဒုက္ခသစ္စာဆင်းရဲမှန်တရားတွေကြီးပဲ
By the body, we mean the body of physical and mental phenomena, the whole process of arising and disappearing mental and physical phenomena, which constitute this so-called body of ours. And that means, of course, that at each of the sense doors, the hearing process, and which involves sound and the hearing base and the hearing consciousness, which are actually nothing but mind and matter, as well as all the other phenomena, which all the other corresponding phenomena, which occur at the respective sense doors, the sights and the eye, seeing consciousness, the smells and tastes and physical sensations and thoughts and so forth. So all these, in short, constitute suffering things. And that is the first truth of the Four Noble Truths.
အဲ့ဒီတရားတွေကိုသူတို့ဖြစ်စေမှလိုက်ပြီးတော့မမှတ်လို့ရှိရင်ဒုက္ခမှမသိဘူးအဲ့ဒီလိုရိုးရိုးဒုက္ခမှမသိတာကိုတော့အပ္ပတိပတ္တိအဝိဇ္ဇာလို့ခေါ်တယ်မြတ်စွာဘုရားကအဲ့ဒီဟာတွေကဆင်းရဲတရားတွေလို့ဟောထားတာကိုဆင်းရဲမှမသိရုံမဟုတ်ပြောင်းမြန်အနေနဲ့သိတာပြောင်းမြန်ကဘယ်လိုလဲဆိုတော့အဲ့ဒါကြီးချမ်းသာလို့ထင်တာကောင်းတယ်လို့ထင်တာမြင်ရတာချမ်းသာတယ်ကြားရတာချမ်းသာတယ်နားရစားအထိရသိရတာအကုန်လုံးချမ်းသာတယ်လို့ထင်တာအဲ့ဒါမိစ္ဆာပฏิပတ်တိအဝိဇ္ဇာခေါ်တယ်လွဲမှားတဲ့လမ်းပေါ့လမ်းကြောင်းရောက်သွားတယ်အမှန်တိုင်းမသိဘူးလို့ခေါ်တယ်
If one is not mindful at the moment of occurrence of any of these sensing processes, then one will not be able to know the First Noble Truth, that in fact the process that is happening at that particular moment constitute suffering things. Now that ignorance of suffering things, that not knowing of suffering things, comes about because of non-practice. So that is the ignorance that is brought about through not practicing. But there is another aspect of ignorance, and that is the ignorance that comes out of delusion. One is deluded into thinking that what is actually suffering things, the mind and matter that occur, for example, at the seeing process, during the seeing process, we regard them as non-suffering things, as pleasurable things, as satisfactory things. So this ignorance is a deluded sort of ignorance, the second aspect. Failing to see the true nature of what is actually happening at the moment, not understanding in a very intuitive and penetrative way the sufferingness, the unsatisfactoriness of, not understanding the, not seeing the actual fact of this suffering thing present at a particular moment, one is deluded into thinking that it is good. And with that delusion, of course, comes the desire and attachment, the desire to hear nice sounds and beautiful sights and visions, and the smell of fragrant smells and good tastes and nice bodily sensations and so forth. So delusion is the underlying cause behind the underlying aspect of this type of ignorance, which would lead to desire and craving.
Yeah, losing look at the iron lady, yabi so ye. Say with Zavio, Tayadora, Maloto, Kaunali, Nimin, you know that. Kaunali, Levichaja, you know that. Nani, Saji, Tea, you know that. Lemaloto. Either Tayas will learn how, Dana Ugaran call.
The desire to see good, beautiful sights and hear nice sounds and so forth will automatically produce attachment or clinging. There is first a desire to see something when you have not yet seen it. And once you've seen it, then there is a clinging to that object. There is a refusal to let go of it. There's a grasping, a clinging. And that is called upadana in Pali, which means clinging. You will notice that here we use that in Pali there are two terms, Tana and upadana, used to name this mental phenomena, this mental state of desire. Actually, this Tana and upadana are different facets of the same mental state of greed. So it is worth looking to see how the subtle the difference is. Craving, tanha or craving, as it is usually translated, is the name given to a weak form of greed. But upadana or clinging, attachment, is given to a more firm form of greed. To give a very simple analogy to illustrate the point, craving or tanha can be compared to the stretching of one's arm to get an object, while upadana or clinging can be compared to the grasping of the object with one's hand. Another example, a more practical one, is like if there's someone who is very desirous of listening to a particular sound or music, and that desire to listen to that music is, that sound or music is tanha or craving. But while one is listening to that music, there is that clinging to it, the fear that the music might stop, that the sound might suddenly disappear. And there's the grasping at it, the clinging at it, not wanting it to stop. And that is upadana or clinging. So the occurrence of all these mental and physical phenomena, if one is unable to note them and penetrate into their true nature and quality, then invariably one would form a misconception. One will be deluded into thinking or conceiving them in a way which is different from what they actually are. For example, in the process of seeing, then one begins to identify with that whole act of seeing. One begins to say, I am seeing, or the seeing is I. And so too with hearing and tasting and smelling and touching and feeling sensations and thinking. I am thinking. Thinking is I. This delusion, this misconception occurs because of the failure to be mindful and to penetrate into the understanding that there is only mind and matter, and they are connected in a very they are connected by a mechanism of cause and effect, and that they come and go from moment to moment, that they are unsatisfactory and that there is no self in them. So, so failure, of course, to note these things for what they really are produces ignorance, which in turn gives the delusion of satisfactoriness and goodness in the things which are actually unsatisfactory and suffering. And due to that delusion, one stimulates desire, or desire arises, and clinging follows. Another aspect of avidya is ignorance of the second noble truth, of the cause of suffering. And not only is there the ordinary ignorance or not knowing of this cause of suffering, but there is also the delusion that comes to think that this actual cause of suffering is the cause of happiness. One is deluded into thinking that the cause of suffering is the cause for happiness and success. Again, there is this pair of ignorance to be found in ignorance of the third noble truth, which is the truth of the cessation of suffering, which is nirvana. The first aspect of ignorance is that there is ignorance because one has not realized nirvana in the here and now. One has not personally seen it, experienced it. That is the first ignorance. The second aspect of ignorance is actually, again, a deluded misconception. One may have read a lot about the theory of what nirvana is, and one knows it is a cessation of suffering things. It means that there's a complete extinction of all mind and matter. And for some people that is something very horrible. Just imagine that you don't have the chance to see, to hear, to think, to feel, to eat, to smell, and it can be very frightening. That nirvana is that sort of that void, annihilation. And so that misconception of nirvana, thinking of it as something really very bad and very disgusting, very frightening, that also is another form of ignorance. Another way of putting it is that instead of understanding that nirvana is the greatest bliss and happiness, one is mistaken into thinking or conceiving nirvana as a great big death and annihilation, as an opposite to as an opposite to happiness and bliss. The ignorance of the Fourth Noble Truth can also be seen in its two aspects. The first aspect is of course ignorance that comes out of the non-practicing of the Eightfold Noble Path. And the second aspect is misconception, thinking that the practice of the Eightfold Noble Path will not lead to the greatest sort of happiness or bliss, but will only lead to this annihilation, this unfortunate great death. So the basic ignorance of these Four Noble Truths will of course lead to a misconception, and one is deluded into thinking that the cause of happiness is desire, and one will be led by desire to even produce more attachment and clinging. And this vicious cycle goes on. And this, of course, is the cycle of kilesas. So, for a person, when one is dragged into that cycle of defilements, then one automatically begins to cling to life, begins to look for ways and means to continue existence, to perpetuate existence and life. And in the process, of course, in the absence of wise attention, of careful attention, then one is prone to be covetous of other people's goods and property. And one may even be assaulted by various feelings of aggression and aversion, wanting to cause harm to other people. And also by the belief, the wrong view that whatever is done for good or for worse, whether it's wholesome or unwholesome, will not produce any results. It is a sort of denial of this operation of the law of karma. And therefore, the mental activities that come up as a result of all these deeds will produce karma. So early on we talk about this covetousness and aggression and the denial of the law of karma, and this actually belongs to the group of unwholesome activities that arise in the mind. However, it follows very naturally that if one is assaulted by these unwholesome mental activities, one will manifest them through speech, through the verbal, to the mouth door, in the form of telling lies, of slandering, backbiting, of using harsh language that will cause hurt to other people, and of indulging in frivolous conversation and gossips and useless talk. It goes without saying that an uncontrolled mind, which has given vent to verbal expression, will also very easily give expression through the body. Such transgressions of morality, such as harming, physically causing harm and killing, the stealing of things which do not belong to us rightfully, which has not been given to us, which belong to other people, to other beings. And thirdly, also to sexual misconduct, behaving in behaving sexually in a way that will cause harm and hurt other people's feelings. And because these activities of mind, of speech and of body revolve around the particular person, we call that the cycle of karma. However, for mortals who are still not yet purified from the kilesas, if they are able to activate very careful attention or wise attention, they may be able to overcome the unwholesome mental activities which we talked about just now. And so in place of covetousness, one may instead be wise enough to develop mental states of generosity, benevolence, of metta, of karuna. And in place of aggression, one can replace it by in place of covetousness, one can replace that by generosity and benevolence. And in place of this aggression, one can instead develop states of loving kindness and compassion and rejoice in other people's success. And also in terms and with proper learning and wise consideration, one can also cultivate faith and understanding with regards to the law of karma. So that will lead to the development of wholesome mental states. In the same way, the unwholesome verbal activities can be replaced by wholesome activities, expressions like being very committed to talking only what is true, being committed to the truth. Also to committed to words that will unite people, that will be the cause of harmony and unity and fraternity and friendship and fellowship. Words that are polite and which do not cause harm to other people, considerate words, and to the practice or to the cultivation of the habit of talking only when it is useful, in the sense that we engage in conversation that will be beneficial and useful, rather than to indulge in useless gossip or chatter.
No muyari tanshin the to do go muyari the level tanshin at about it. Tanshin Mungano Ujins at the Teshita de Wari go Matapsha Chima Shantina. Here, 2 IBC will have Matia, you, Matia, Eugene, level let each other shouting at it. Go my bine, Kamakisari, level Luefaz, ပြုခြင်းကိုပိုင်တဲ့ဟာနဲ့ပဲကျင့်တတ်တယ်အဲ့ဒီခါမျိုးတန်ရှင်းတဲ့ကိုအမူအရာပေါ့လေကာတုစိတကုသိုလ်တရားတွေဖြစ်နေပါတယ်ကုသိုလ်ကံတွေဖြစ်နေပါတယ်
Just as wise attention can be the cause for wholesome verbal activities to occur, so too wholesome physical activities can be developed. For example, in the place of violence and aggression, one can practice a code of non-violence, of not being aggressive, of not causing hurt, physical harm to other beings, of not killing other beings. One can also practice the virtue of honesty, of not taking things which do not rightly belong to us, which have not been given to us by any means whatsoever. And thirdly, one can also practice morality with regard to one's sexuality, which means having a very high sense of consideration for other people and not causing hurt or harm to other people's feelings.
အဲဒီကုသိုလ်တရားတွေဟာယောနိသောမနစိကာရခေါ်တဲ့စိတ်ထားဖြောင့်ရှင်းတဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်တွေမှာဖြစ်နေတတ်ပါတယ်
Yeah.
ယောနိသောမနစိကာရရှိတဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်တွေမှာသူစိတ်ကုသိုလ်တရားတွေဖြစ်နေတယ်
So as you can see, for a person who is in the habit of cultivating this wise attention, then he will have the opportunity to develop all these various wholesome mental, verbal and physical activities.
အဲဒီလိုသူစိတ်10ပါးအကုသိုလ်ကံတွေနဲ့သူစိတ်10ပါးကုသိုလ်ကံတွေဟာဘယ်လိုအကြောင်းပြုပြီးတော့ဖြစ်ပေါ်လာတယ်လို့ဆိုတော့ခုနအဝိဇ္ဇာတနာဥပါဒံခေါ်တဲ့ကိလေသာကိုအကြောင်းပြုပြီးတော့ဖြစ်လာတာပါ
One may ask, what is the cause of the development of these 10 types of wholesome activities and 10 types of unwholesome activities? Then one could answer that it is on account of this cycle of kilesas, of ignorance, of craving and clinging that brings about the performance of these wholesome and unwholesome activities.
အကုသိုလ်ကံတွေကဘာတွေအကျိုးပေးမလဲလို့ဆိုတော့အပယ်အကျိုးပေးပါတယ်အပယ်မှာသွားပြီးတော့ဘဝတည်ဖြစ်ရတယ်ဥပါကဖြစ်ကုသိုလ်ကံတွေကဘာဝဇ္ဇရာကုသိုလ်ကံဆိုလို့ရှိရင်လူဘဝနတ်ဘဝအဲ့ဒါမှဖြစ်တယ်လူဘဝဇ္ဇရာကုသိုလ်ကံဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ရူပဘုံဇမဘုံမှာဖြစ်တယ်အရူပဝဇ္ဇရာကုသိုလ်ကံဆိုလို့ရှိရင်အရူပဘုံမှာသွားပြီးတော့ဖြစ်တယ်အဲ့ဒါလိုဘဝတည်ဖြစ်ရတာဝိပါကဝလို့ခေါ်ပါတယ်
What then would be the resultants, would be the effects of these wholesome and unwholesome activities? Unwholesome karma would of course be the main cause for rebirth in states of war. And wholesome karma, depending on which level it belongs to, will give rise to rebirth in the human world or in the world of devas. Or if at a higher level, it could give rise to birth in the realm of the Brahmas of form. And even higher than that, to birth in the Brahmas, in the world of Brahmas of formlessness.
ဒ Thì đi nhà thà na mà nên mấy gì đi xí vậy. Lưu đi ta na mà phiền đi đấy, mimi đi ta na mà phiền đi đấy. Cứ tụ cái ác tụ cái này ha. Thì khá là cháu đây xem được phiền đi đấy đi không phải là. Đi đi ha phiền bị rồi phiền là tại đi mình đi về này. Phiền chết rồi đấy. Thì lúc phiền chết rồi thì cái nó bảo về lúc bị rồi chú bên đi rồi lúc thì lúc ấy tùy sao gì à.
One might ask at this point, isn't it true that all the mind and matter, all the phenomena that occurs in our so-called body are actually nothing more than conditioned processes, that they are conditioned phenomena, they arise and they pass and they don't even last for more than a moment. How is it possible that any of these activities, any of these occurrences which has already occurred and disappeared, how could they be the cause for an effect, be the cause for a rebirth in a further existence?
Tahazata Sirana, Nanagriga Kama Sirana, the cover. Tahazata Sirana Sura Agudu Pite Kama, Agudu Saint, she and Duevido Pierre, Slum Soja Sirana, and a Tahazata Sirana, the cover. Eddie Sirana, Leha, Tingara Toza, Chibido Pietwabi, Bibi Jobium, Hopene. Now the chain body, Makongu people ya, do it. 30 နှစ်ကလေးပေါ့လေအဲ့ဒီ30နှစ်ကလေးကိုနာနဂရိကကာမစေတနာလို့ခေါ်တယ်ထို့အတူကုသိုလ်ပြုတဲ့အခါမျိုးမှာလည်းပဲကုသိုလ်စိတ်နဲ့ရှင်တွဲပြီးတော့တပါးတည်းပါနေတဲ့သာသနာစေတနာဆိုတာရှိတယ်နောက်တစ်ချိန်မှာဖွင့်သားလို့ရှိရင်တရားဘဝမှာအကျိုးပေးဖို့ရအတွက်30နှစ်ကလေးကျန်နေတယ်အဲ့ဒီ30နှစ်ကလေးကိုနာနဂရိကကာမစေတနာလို့ခေါ်ပါတယ်နာနဂရိက
Sayadaw would like to identify two types of volition two aspects of volition. One is called Sahajata Cetana and the other is called Nanagatika Cetana. The first aspect of volition is that state of mind, that factor of mind, which arises simultaneous with the consciousness, the mind that is intending to do good or bad, wholesome or unwholesome deeds. And that is one aspect of karma. We call that cetana, that volition that appears simultaneous with the consciousness that is intending to do wholesome or unwholesome deeds, karma. But there is another aspect. There is the aspect, this particular volition, this first aspect of Sahajata Cetana volition, in fact, arises together with the consciousness and disappears at the same time that the consciousness falls away. So it lasts for barely less than that fraction of a second. On the other hand, this Sahajata Cetana, or this volition that occurs simultaneous with consciousness, also generates an energy which is a sort of potential or latent energy. And that aspect of that volition is called Nanagatika Cetana, which will hang around, so to speak, and produce results at a future time, at a time that is apart from that moment that the first aspect of volition occurred.
Loki umali in Shimbiati Loga ma Midazu Sura Shija. Any Midazu Sure, Midazu Lepa Tetem Yemia Pagin Suyawazu. Any Pagin ha သူတက်ရှင်စီကာလမှာနေရာဌာနတိုင်းတက်တက်မြင့်မြင့်ရှိတယ်။အများနဲ့လည်းပဲဝင်စားနဲ့လူမှုဆက်ဆံရေးလည်းပဲကောင်းတယ်။ကိုကိစ္စဒီကိစ္စတွေမှာလည်းပဲပါဝင်ဆောင်ရွက်တယ်။သူပါဝင်ဆောင်ရွက်တဲ့မြတ်ကိစ္စတွေမှာအကုန်လုံးချုံမောတာပဲ။နောက်တစ်ချိန်မှာအဲ့ဒီဖခင်ကွယ်လွန်သွားရင်ကျန်တဲ့မိသားစုမှာဖခင်အရှိန်နေပေါ့ကျန်နေတယ်။ သူအပြင်သားသမီးတွေမှာကျန်နေတယ်သားသမီးတွေနဲ့ပတ်သက်လာလို့ရှိရင်ဒီကလေးကဒီသားဒီသမီးကတော့မှာပေါ့သူ့ဖခင်ကဘယ်လိုကိုဆိုတာပေါ့ဖခင်ရဲ့အရှိန်ဟာသားသမီးတွေမှာဒီမှာကြံပြီးတော့စကားပြောကြတာသူကဖခင်ကတော့မရှိတော့ဘူးဒါပေမဲ့လို့သားသမီးတွေမှာဖခင်ရဲ့အရှိန်ကျန်နေတယ်အရှိန် ဒါလိုပဲသာသနာစီရနာဆိုတာကဖခင်နဲ့ထက်မြက်တဲ့ဖခင်နဲ့တူပါတယ်သူရဲ့အရှိန်ကဖခင်ရဲ့အရှိန်ကနာနဂရိကကမ္မစီရနာနဲ့တူပါတယ်သို့တော့ဒီအရှိန်ပြသားမှာဆိုရင်တော့ပြလို့တော့မရဘူးဒါပေမဲ့လို့ကျန်ရခဲ့တဲ့သာသမီတွေမှာတော့ဖခင်ရဲ့အရှိန်ကတော့ထင်ရှားနေတာဘယ်သူမှမငြင်းနိုင်ပါဘူး
Sayadaw would like to illustrate this explanation of the two aspects of Cetana, of volition, by a very worldly example. Take for instance a family. The head of the family or the parents may be very hardworking and intelligent people or brilliant people. They become very prominent in life, make a name for themselves, and they are known, and their fame is spread throughout the nation. Upon their death, the children of this couple will somehow inherit the fame and prominence that their parents had gained. It's a sort of a shadow that follows them. And Sayadaw would like to point out that this first aspect of volition can be compared to the parents and their fame and prominence when they were alive. Whereas the second aspect of volition, the potential energy, can be compared to the fame and their prominence which was left behind when they died, which also became a very natural inheritance of their children.
နောက်တစ်ခုလည်းရှိပါသေးတယ်ငငယ်ရွယ်ကသင်ထားတဲ့အတတ်ပညာတွေကြီးတဲ့အထိပေါ်ဒီပေါ်ရတဲ့အထိအစီအစဉ်နဲ့ပြန်ပြီးတော့ပြောပြစမ်းမှာဆိုရင်မပြောတတ်တဲ့အပြင်တချို့ဟာဒီမေ့ကုန်ပြီဒါပေမဲ့လို့ငငယ်ကသင်ကြားထားတဲ့တစင်းမိတစင်းတရားမိတရားသင်ကြားတဲ့သင်ကြားမှုအရှိန်ဟာအထက်ထက်အတန်းတွေအတွက်ထောက်ကူပြုတယ်ဆိုတာလည်းပဲဒါလည်းပဲလောကမှာထင်ရှားပါတယ်
Another example is if a person who has gone through elementary education and has grown up through college and university, and at a point of his life when He's really got all his degrees. If someone would ask him if he could remember some of the things that he learned when he was a kid, or remember the sequence of the things he learned in detail from one class to another, from one year to another, he would not be able to relate them in detail. But yet it cannot be denied that as a result of his education through his younger days, he has accumulated the knowledge which has been extremely helpful to his present situation. So that accumulated knowledge, which he may not be able to relate or explain, is actually there, it's underlying his whole growth. Another example can be seen in the practice of feeding children. There are some parents who feed children at a very young age with a lot of herbal medicine, which is a sort of vitamin or health food. And at that particular moment when they are being fed, or in that proximate future, they do not really, one cannot really see the direct or immediate benefits of those medicines. But it cannot be denied that further on, when the child grows up, the medicines that he had taken had contributed to his healthy growth and development. Another example is a plant. When it grows up and bears fruits, then it will also have seeds in the fruits, which of course is a means for perpetuating the species. And that in that seed, although we cannot really show in a direct way a new plant, in that seed lies the potential for the growth of a new plant. And so that seed, which is produced in the mother plant, will act as, will be the cause for the growth or the sprouting of a new plant, because it has within it the potential for growth. So if it's a plant that bears a particular kind of fruit, which is sweet, then the seed will also sprout a new plant, which will give fruits, the same kind of fruits, the same species of fruit, which is sweet. And if the seed belong to a plant of a different species, it will very naturally give rise, or it will naturally sprout a new plant and give